a walkthrough of Scrum. Take a look at Scrum. Scrum is a framework for agile software development. This diagram is used by the Scrum Alliance to explain Scrum, and I'm going to walk through it from different perspectives to try to do the same. So the first thing is roles and responsibilities. So if you are implementing software engineering with Scrum, what are the roles? Well, the first role is the product owner. The product owner is indeed a business driver for the project. It's someone who is the final say. Customer driven, they make all trade-offs and they prioritize whatever has to be prioritized. The product owner is responsible for the requirements. The product owner is not responsible for the design. Product owner is responsible for business, not responsible for architecture. The product owner is saying what the goal is. What is the goal of the project? The second role in Scrum is the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is not a project manager. It's not a director. The Scrum Master is instead a facilitator. The Scrum Master coordinates between the Scrum team and the external world. Indeed, sometimes their role might be considered a protector of the Scrum team. Let the Scrum team get the job done. Let the Scrum team succeed. Give them a chance to do what they need to do. The Scrum Master tries to basically coordinate the work of the team, share the progress of the team, and help the team work by tracking their work at the task level. The Scrum Master is a facilitator. The Scrum Master protects the team, and the Scrum Master shares with the outside world what is the progress of the team. Then the third role in Scrum is that of the team member. Indeed, there are no siloed roles in Scrum. There's no tester in Scrum. There's no programmer in Scrum. There's no technical writer in Scrum. In Scrum, indeed, what we have are people who are a team of technical professionals trying to get the job done, and they don't hide behind a role. We have people with various skills and various abilities who are there to basically implement whatever tasks are required to meet the commitment that the team has made, to meet the commitment to implement the requirements that the product owner requires. So their job is to get things done. And as a team member with different skills and experiences, we actually self-organize to try to be more efficient. So the Agile team using Scrum self-organizes. They do not follow a template or a standardized methodology to actually get the technical work done. They self-organize based on their skills, abilities, and experiences to get the work done. Objects. The product backlog is an object of Scrum. The product backlog is a list of requirements. The product backlog does not have a lot of detail. It is indeed very different from a standard traditional IEEE 830 style formal requirement specification document. The requirement list in an agile team using Scrum very often is 1 or 2 bullets of text per requirement. The product owner is responsible for the product backlog. The product owner is responsible for prioritizing the product backlog and for making sure that the team knows this priority and uses this priority. The product backlog can include functional requirements, non-functional requirements, user stories, deliverables, and constraints related to the development effort. In the product backlog, which is prioritized by the product owner, we will see much more detail in high priority items than in low priority items. So low priority items, 1 or 2 bullets of text, not much stuff. High priority items may include much more detail, including disambiguated statement, all of the acceptance criteria clearly spelled out. So high priority things, more detail, low priority, less detail. The sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog. The sprint backlog is something that includes high priority stories. Every element of the sprint backlog has well-established acceptance criterion. Every element of the sprint backlog is detailed enough for the team to estimate and commit to implement the acceptance criterion of the story. The team is ready to implement stories in the sprint backlog or elements of the sprint backlog, and the team is committed to doing it. So the sprint backlog is a subset of the product backlog that the team is committed to implementing in the subsequent sprint. The backlog tasks is put together by the team and describes the actual technical work the team is going to do. They usually put together the backlog tasks in a planning meeting at the very, very beginning of a sprint. The backlog tasks include work that will be done by team members. The granularity of these tasks is generally between 1 hour and 1 day of effort. Based on the statement of the tasks, team members can identify that they have the skills needed to implement the task, and it's clear to all team members. It does not have to be clear to anybody on the planet Earth, but it has to be clear to all team members. What are the skills required to implement the tasks? So this backlog tasks is really a statement of the technical work the team has to do to implement the sprint backlog. This is actually a statement of design. The sprint itself is a time box. In Scrum, we see a common sprint size being between 1 and 4 weeks of effort. I've actually never seen sprint sizes less than a week, and it's very rare that I see them more than 4 weeks. In this day and age, looking at my customers, they're usually 2 or 3 week sprints, tending towards 2, which is for me exhausting to imagine 2 week sprints, but that's where we're tending towards. So a sprint is called sometimes an iteration, and during the sprint, the team does the work required to implement the sprint backlog. So at the end of the sprint, we have implemented the sprint backlog. Every day during the sprint, the team holds a meeting. It's a daily stand-up meeting. The metaphor for stand-up meeting is that you stand up, it's short, no one has a chance to get comfortable and sit down. The stand-up meeting is often at the very beginning of the day, in the morning, but it's up to the team to organize when it is. For distributed teams, you may have it almost any time in the clock. During the stand-up meeting, the Scrum meeting, the Scrum Master facilitates this meeting and asks the following questions. They ask what tasks are in progress, what tasks have been completed, and are there any impediments to the tasks that we've identified. They're also trying to identify, are there new tasks we have to do, or are there old tasks that we don't have to do anymore? So the Scrum Master is basically tracking the project on a task basis during the stand-up meeting. A product at the end of a sprint is in a state that is potentially shippable. That means that every feature that's been implemented from the sprint backlog is ready to go. We've created an increment of the product. We haven't created the whole product. We've created a part of the product which is ready, which is done. No more software engineering work is required. Maybe we require some deployment related work. Maybe we require some stuff related to getting the product shipped, but there's no more real software engineering work done. The product conforms to the done checklist. It's shippable. There's several rituals that Agile teams do, and one common one is called a grooming session. A grooming session is held periodically. Teams will do this every week or every 2 weeks. And basically, during the grooming session, what they do is they review backlog entries identified by the product owner. The product owner brings to the attention of the team backlog entries, and they improve them. They actually look at stuff that's maybe going to be implemented 1 or 2 sprints in advance. They look at the requirement. They try to disambiguate the requirement, make sure it's clear what the goal is, make sure we have acceptance criterion for the requirement, make sure that we can relate the new requirement to our past shared experience, make sure we can estimate the size of the requirement. And ultimately, what we're going to do in the grooming session is make sure the requirements are ready for us to be in a position to commit to them as part of our negotiation. Teams estimate the effort required to implement a feature, a story, a backlog entry by doing what's called sizing. Sizing is sometimes done in the very same meeting that grooming is done, or it could be a different meeting or different session. The team knows what the story is. They know what the acceptance criteria is. They've related the story to their past shared experience, so they can basically estimate the effort required to implement the story. A team basically knows what their capacity is. So if they have a capacity of 100 story points, they know that the aggregate amount of effort can't exceed 100 story points. The velocity of a team is the amount of work they can do over time. Story points over time is a common measure of velocity. Teams often use planning poker to estimate the size of stories. Planning poker is a descendant of wideband Delphi, and that's a team-based estimation approach in which we basically look at new work related to past shared experience. When the team has sized the stories, groomed the stories, they're in a position now they can start negotiating with the product owner. The negotiation certainly has to take place before the sprint starts, but there's a lot of diversity as to how teams actually do this negotiation. The product owner knows what the stories are, knows what the business priorities are. The team knows what their capacity is, knows what sort of technical debt that they've acquired with time. The product owner knows how features relate to each other, and the team understands any technical dependencies between stories. And in the negotiation, the team basically ends up committing to implementing a subset of the product backlog in the upcoming sprint. When the sprint starts, one of the first things a team does is hold some sort of planning session. It's usually early in the sprint, sometimes the very first thing that a team does. All members of the team participate in this planning session, and the session is trying to figure out what work do we have to do, what actual technical work do we have to do to implement the sprint backlog. So we look at basically how we're going to solve the problem, what technical design are we going to use, and we identify a list of tasks that are described so that people in the team with appropriate skills can execute the tasks. So the deliverable at the end of a planning session is a list of tasks. And this list of tasks is what's going to be used to track the progress of the team as we go through the sprint, A Scrum team, agrees with the product owner as to what it means for a story or a feature or a requirement to be done. So the team and the product owner agree on what done means. And whenever anybody in the team says something is done, it's the same definition as any other member of the team. We're looking for consistency. When we say a story is done, there should be no more development required, no more testing required, and the feature can be used by customers to do something useful. So done means ready. Now, teams agree with product owners on what done means and create usually what's called a done checklist. So that done checklist is something that's shared between the team and the product owner, and it's a commitment. At the end of the sprint, when the stories are done and the time box is over, the team has what's called a demo. In the demo, the team shows to the customer, product owner, and other stakeholders that we show that the stories or the features we implemented match and meet the acceptance criterion and can interact with other features that are already there. The team also shows to the stakeholders any information about non-functional requirements that have been met or constraints or other deliverables of the project. So it is indeed a fact that we demo what we did to our customer. After the demo is done, an agile team using Scrum will very often have what's called a retrospective meeting. So these happen per sprint, and the team basically takes a look at what worked, what didn't work, any problems they had, and they want to adapt their self-organization. Teams look for things like clusters of bugs, which are multiple problems with a common cause, and try to basically eradicate that cause by applying new methods and new techniques to their software engineering. So this is one of the most fundamental and critical parts of Scrum. The team improves their process after